Be reading verses 24 through 27. Be reading out of the New King James. Hebrews chapter 11, 24 through 7. By faith, Moses, when he became age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. By faith he forsake Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible.
This is the second in our series of lessons on Jesus is my friend. We talked 2 weeks ago, Jesus is my friend because he understands me. We're going to break that down and seeing how Jesus understands us in different situations in life. Today we'll talk about Jesus understands me when I'm tired and when I'm tempted. To set the stage for that, I'd like to share with you feeling right. See, there's some people who think we don't have a right to our feelings. Have you ever had anybody say, well, you oughtn't to feel that way? That's the way I feel. You mean it's a sin? What to feel? Feeling rights tell us I have a right to my feelings. God made me with emotions. He made me with the capacity to experience sadness, fear, and anger, as well as joy and contentment. And as we go through this, I'll be giving some book, chapter, and verse. This is not something somebody just pulled out of thin air. I have a right to feel as I do toward other people. These feelings should be contrasted with the actions coming out of those feelings. I have a right to be mad, sad, glad, scared, or any combination of those. However, I need to think about how I'm going to respond to those feelings and do those things in a responsible way. Jesus, who did no sin, was able to feel compassion, grief, and anger, as well as other emotions. Mark 1:41, Jesus was moved with compassion. Compassion is the feeling of concern and pity coupled with a desire to do something to alleviate that. And so on a number of occasions we find that Jesus was filled with compassion. As he looked upon people as sheep having no shepherd. He was filled with compassion when people were hungry. And so it's okay to feel compassion. Jesus also was able to feel grief and anger. Shortest verse in the Bible, John 11:35, Jesus wept. Wow, it's okay to cry. It's okay for Jesus to cry. It's all right for Jerry to cry. It's all right for you to cry. Jesus in Mark 3:5, he looked around them with anger, being grieved because of the hardness of their hearts. Interesting passage. Anger is a secondary emotion. Something prompts the anger. And many times, if I can recognize what is prompting my anger, I can go back and deal with that and not have an outburst of anger that could be destructive, harmful, and sinful. Not the anger is sinful, but the actions that that are prompted by it. And so Jesus felt all of those things, and Jesus did no sin. So I have a right to my feelings. I have a right to feel toward others as I do. Number 3, I have a right to express my feelings. Expressions of feelings should be done openly, honestly, specifically, caringly, respectfully, and responsibly. Wow, that's complicated. That's right. That is exactly right. One of the most spiritual things that a person can do is to think. Where we get into trouble and hurt ourselves and others many times is responding without thinking, which is called a reaction rather than an action. So I need to be sure when I'm expressing those powerful emotions that I'm doing it openly, honestly, telling the truth about it, specifically, not you've been doing that for the last 25 years. I remember one time I went to James Jones. I said, James, there's a man here who just aggravates the living daylights out of me. And he does the same thing over and over and over and over again. How can I deal with that? He said, well, if you never did it again, you think you could live with that? I said, sure, wish you would and quit. He said, okay, probably he won't if he's been doing that often. The next time he does that, why don't you address that specific instance and not reminding him of how many times he's done it before? Just deal with it specifically. What you did, what you said now is irritating, or it's hurting, or it's disappointing, or it's hurtful, or whatever it is. Do it caringly. Speak to him as I'd like to be spoken to when I do things like that, with respect and with responsibility. Feelings should be expressed at the appropriate time and the proper place in adequate amounts and toward the appropriate person. What happens many times, we have a tough day and come home and unload it on the family. They really didn't have anything to do it. It was a boss or a fellow worker, and so we come home and take it out on the dog or the cat or the family. I have a right and responsibility to listen and to respond to the feelings of others. See, I not only have a right to my feelings, but other people have a right to their feelings, and they have a right to express that, and so I need to be prepared to be the listener as well as the talker. One who truly listens to another communicates, I care about you, you are important and valuable as a person, you are not bad and terrible, though you share your painful feelings. Careful and concerned listening is a way of practicing the golden rule. As you would that men should do to you, do you even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Number 5, I have a right to process or work through my feelings. One is often when one is expressing painful feelings such as grief or anger, somebody will say, well, you ought to feel that way. It's time to get over it. Well, who made that rule? I need to be able to listen to that as well as to express that. This idea that you shouldn't feel that way contradicts clear Bible teaching. Ecclesiastes 3:4, there's a time to weep and a time to laugh. Romans 12:15, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Ephesians 4:26, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down upon your wrath. To work through or put away our feelings, here's some steps that might be helpful. Ephesians 4:21, therefore putting away anger, wrath, evil speaking. He says that these things are to be put away. How do we put them away? Number 1, a person must be aware of having feelings. Some people are so uncomfortable and so inexperienced, they're not even aware of what they're feeling. I was talking with a man several years ago, and he had an outburst. I mean, his face got red and his veins stuck out. And I said, sounds like you're angry. I don't get angry. I said, well, okay. My experience has been that when people's face get red and their veins stick out and they shout, many times that's an expression of anger. So I'll have to learn to readjust to your response if you're not angry. See, he wasn't even aware that he's angry. Probably was ashamed if anybody would accuse him of that. So I have to first, yep, that's anger. I've always been uncomfortable with it, but that's exactly what it is. Number 2, an individual must correctly identify his feelings. An individual must analyze his feelings and their origin. Where did that come from? Sometimes where it came from was 25, 30 years ago. He needs to, or she needs to express the appropriate amount of feelings at an appropriate time in the appropriate place toward the correct persons or events. Time and place. The time to do it is when we have time to do it. The appropriate place is not in the front of a lot of other people. If your brother sins against you, if someone misses the mark, Go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. I often say you can't practice Matthew 18:15 by having a fit in the foyer. There's too many people standing around. You need to get to an appropriate place where there's two people. In working through these feelings, a person must experience them, not just say feeling words. For example, the way you process that and experience them is crying till you get through crying, not just talking about being sad. So, if those things are true, and I believe they are, then it's wonderful and comforting to know that Jesus understands me when I'm tired. You ever just get so tired you can't wiggle? Just exhausted. Well, you ought to get tired doing good stuff. Oh, is that right? I wonder why Paul wrote Galatians 6:9, and let us not become weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Paul and the Holy Spirit thought it must be possible to get weary while doing good, because that's not the only time he discusses that issue. Yeah, we can do good stuff for so long and so hard that we get tired doing good. We shouldn't start doing bad, but we might want to rest from doing good. Doing nothing is one of the best things we can do many times. If I do not get that rest, then I will lose my hope. It's not doing any good. Why in the world? Doesn't make any difference. Folks don't listen. Oh, no. Isaiah 55:10 and 11, for as the rain comes down and the snow from heaven, and does not return there, but waters the earth, that it may give seed for the sower and bread to the eater, so shall my word be that goes forth out of my mouth. It shall not return to me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing to which I sent it. See, sometimes when I am weary doing good, I can pause and reflect and rest and think about, I think God tells the truth. And he said it will accomplish what it needs to accomplish. I need to keep on spreading the word. 1 Corinthians 15:58, therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Sometimes when I get weary in well-doing, it is because what I'm trying to do is too difficult. It's just more than I need to be doing right now. Last year I had some physical issues, and I got tired and hurting, and I just quit running, walking, I walked from here to there, but I didn't do it for exercise for 4 months. I had just gotten exhausted. And so I started back gradually, and I'm about up to par again. I got the miles in, jogging most of them, and so sometimes we can do that spiritually. In Acts chapter 15, when they came to Jerusalem to discuss, is it necessary for Gentiles to keep the law of Moses and to be circumcised, or is it not necessary? And there were some, you must do it. And Peter said, why do you lay upon the brethren a yoke which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear? Peter was saying, why in the world do you want to impose this on the Gentiles? And there's never been a human being in the history of the world that's been able to do that. Our fathers wasn't able to do it. They couldn't keep all those 613 commands in the Old Testament. They couldn't do it. We've tried it. We haven't been able to do it. Why do we want to tell these people they have to do it? It's too much. It's too much. Can't do it. It may be more than we can do. Maybe all good, but it's more. Just because it's a good thing doesn't mean that I need to do it. Acts chapter 6. There was a group who came to the apostles and said our widows were being neglected in the daily distribution of food. They were Greek-speaking Jews. And so they came and complained. The local folks are getting more food when you pass out food than folks who are not like your group. And the apostles said, we're not going to the grocery store. We're not going to do it. Why? Because we already have all we can do, ministering by the Word of God and prayer. Now, it needs to be done, but we're not going to do it. You select 7 men full of faith and the Holy Spirit whom we may appoint over this business. We'll keep on doing what we're doing, and we're pretty well full-time with that. So we don't have to take on another work just because it's a good work if we're already doing all we can do. Jesus promises this, Matthew 11, 28 to 30. Listen to what he says. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus said, I will show you, both by word and example, how to keep a balanced life. Isn't that great? It is easy to stay where I need to be. I tend to go from one extreme to another. Neither one of them is good. Overwork is not good. Overrest is not good. And Jesus demonstrates that. Mark chapter 6. Beginning with verse 30. Then the apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done, what they had taught. And he said to them, come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves. And so they got into a boat, and they went across the Sea of Galilee, and what happened? When they landed, here's that multitude ran around, and here they are, and what do they do now? Jesus teaches. They fed 5,000 men beside the women and children, and they didn't get any rest. Notice verses 45 and 46. After they took up the loaves, 12 baskets full of fragments of the loaves and the fish, immediately he, that is Jesus, made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side to Bethsaida, and he sent the multitude away. He made, other translations say he insisted, he constrained. Well, Jesus looks to me like they need to be preaching the word. You got people who are interested. You got people. He said, no, we tried it on the other side, and now we come around to here. It's time, I'm telling you, get in the boat. I'm making you, I'm constraining you, I'm insisting that you do that. And then what did he do? And when he had sent them, that is the multitude, away, he departed to the mountain to pray. They not only needed to rest, but Jesus needed to rest, and so he put them to rest, and then he took off and rested from them. Do you never ever need to get from around your family and rest a while? You don't have to shake your head or grin. Just say, yep, that happens sometimes. Especially while the kids are home. Gail said, it's about time for you to go on a meeting by yourself. And so there are times when we need to get away and rest a while. Number 2, Jesus understands me when I'm tempted. Hebrews 4:15, for we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Double negative is a positive. We do have a high priest who can sympathize with our weaknesses because he was tempted every way that we are. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life. Check it out. Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. And that's not the only time Jesus was tempted. That's the 3 in a row that we have recorded by gospel writers, but he was often tempted. And it says that the devil departed for a season, which means he wasn't through with him. He'd be back later on, and he did. Jesus understands it. So we have to understand what is temptation, and should I feel guilty because I'm being tempted? Observation. It is my observation that many people feel guilty too early. And then we will get guilt fatigue and say, I might as well go ahead and do it, and I might as well go ahead and do it and enjoy it because I've already sinned anyhow. Well, no, it may be because I misunderstand what temptation is. Is it a sin to be tempted? Evidently not, because Jesus was tempted in all points as we are, zero sin. So if Jesus can be tempted and not sin, you and I can be tempted and not sin. Number two, is it a sin to think about sinning? Now think about that a minute. Is it a sin to think about sinning? All right, let's ask another question. Have you ever been tempted to commit any sin that you never thought about, never entered your mind? I mean, how could you be tempted to do something that you never thought about? So evidently it's not a sin to think about sinning. Number next, is it a sin to want to sin? Boy, I'd really like to do that. Let's read James 1, verses 13 to 15. He takes us through the process from temptation to sin to the consequences of sin, which is death. James 1:13. Let no one say when he is tempted, I'm tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Okay, we're in temptation. A man, a person, a human being is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires, synonym passion, synonym lust. When someone lusts, when someone desires, when someone has a passion for something. He has desires and entice. What's happening here? Temptation. It's not a sin to be tempted. So is it a sin to want to sin? Are you more inclined to be tempted when it's something you really want to do, or when you say, ugh, that'd be disgusting? I don't want to do yucky stuff. I'm not tempted to do stuff like that. Acts chapter 15, when they discussed whether they had to keep the law of Moses, they said, here's what we're going to write. We're going to write a letter to the Gentiles and tell them that they should abstain from blood, from things offered to idols, from fornication. I'll just have to confess to you, I've never been tempted to eat blood pudding. I've heard that sometimes people go bear hunting and they drain the blood, make a good pudding out of that bear blood. If that was still the rule for Gentiles today, I'm a Gentile, I don't want any blood pudding. Yuck. Now, there's some other things that are more enticing to me, and that's what I'm tempted to do, not eat blood pudding, but something that at least it seems like it ought to be a lot of fun. But we're still in temptation. Each one is tempted when he's drawn away by his own desires and enticed. And somebody says, what about Matthew 5:28? Whoever looks on a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. What are you going to do about that? Good question. When does the sin come? It's tempted when he's drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire, which is still temptation, has conceived, see, it has to go through a gestation process. It's conceived, and so it's growing and it's growing. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. So what is sin? It is what I do about what I think and what I want to do. And so it's when an action occurs. So, Jesus understands when I'm tempted. Do you think Jesus would like to have a good bite of bread when he hadn't had anything to eat for 40 days and 40 nights? He was tempted. He was tempted. But he said, no, I'm not going to eat that. I'm not going to turn rocks into bread and have a good bite of bread right now. Not going to do that. It's written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. And so, it's not a sin to think about it. It's not a sin to want to do it. It's a sin to do it. So how do you do that? How do you overcome temptation? Matthew 5:29-30 follows Matthew 5:28. He said, if you're having trouble with your thoughts about somebody else, if a man is going on and on and on, looking at a woman in order to lust after her, then you've got to change the scenery somehow. He said, what you need to do is either pluck out your eye or cut off your hand. And I don't think, I've heard of people who literally did that. That's not what he was talking about. Take drastic action. I may need to move my place of residence. I may need to change my place of work. I may need to do some very drastic things in order to get out of the way of being tempted. That's what Jesus said in Matthew 6. I need to ask the question, am I thinking about sinning or am I already sinning? See, thinking about sinning and sinning is two different things. It's not wrong to think about it. Can't be tempted if you don't think. It's not wrong to want to. That's what we're tempted to do. What we want to do, it's wrong to do it. And so I asked some questions. Am I looking at choices and consequences? I do not believe people sin because they think about sinning. People sin because they don't think enough about sinning. A lot of people just react, instead of thinking about, okay, if I do this, what's going to happen in 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 years, and 50 years? What's going to be the results of my relationships with other people now? What are my children, grandchildren going to think about this when they learn that I've done this? What's going to be the results of that? People don't sin because they think about sinning. People sin because they don't think about sinning enough. Am I looking for truth or for an excuse? Am I being honest with myself? We hear a lot of people talking about having an accountability partner, and that can be handy. Sometimes it's good for somebody just to remind me, hey, here's what you promised to do. Observation. That may be a temporary aid, but until I am my own accountability in conjunction with God, it's probably never going to work. If all I'm trying to do is to give a good report to my accountability partner, I can figure out ways to deceive that person. And so what I want to be sure is I'm not deceiving myself. Psalm 51, verse 6, behold you, God, behold, you desire truth in the inward parts, in the hidden parts you will make me to know wisdom. And David was speaking out of his experience with his sin with Bathsheba and killing her husband, Uriah the Hittite. Psalm 139, 23, and 24. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties, and see if there's any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. So how can I know if I'm making good decisions during temptation? Number one, have I looked at the choices and their consequences, and have I done that enough to be confused? A lot of people say, Jerry, I need to talk to you. I'm confused. And I say, wonderful. Wonderful. I don't like being confused. Well, I don't either, but I don't know how to make a good, big decision without being confused. Donald read for us from Hebrews 11. What did Moses do? He looked at choices and consequences. By faith, Moses, when he became of age, 40 years old. When he was 40 years old, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing of pleasures of sin. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. He thought of choices and consequences. If I stay in Egypt, I'll have power, I'll have money. The king won't be mad at me. If I go with God's people, there'll be some affliction, some persecution that comes with that. But I believe that is better than the passing pleasures of sin. And so he went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and eventually made a good decision. And he did that and ended up running off from Egypt and being a shepherd in the desert 40 more years. He's 40 years old when he left, 40 years. And when God came to him, what happened? He's not really up for this deal now. God says, I want you to go tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And he said, no, not me. I don't know your name. What if they don't believe me? I'm not a good speaker. He was really processing all that stuff. I have a sermon outlined where I was very critical of Moses for being a doubter. And I think now he's pretty smart. I think what he's saying, unless you can show me how it's going to be better this time than it was the last time, I don't have any need to butt my head against the wall the second time. The last time I tried to become a leader, I got run out of Egypt. Now, can you demonstrate to me and encourage me that it'll come out better this time? And God did, and he did, and became the great leader that he was. That's part of decision making. Look at choices and consequences. Experience the pain of being confused till you finally come to a good decision. And then evaluate. What do you like from a friend that you want to help you make a good decision? One way that people try to encourage a friend, well, just forget about it. Don't even think of beep, 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 beep. Don't even say that word again. Never mention it. Don't even think about it. Just put it out of your mind. Don't find that in the Bible. That's not the way to do it. You need to think about choices and consequences. You can't even do that. Sure you can. People do it all the time. But is that what I want to do? Number 2. Remember that people sin not because they think about sinning, but because they don't think about sinning enough. So how can a friend be helpful during temptation? Number 1, would you like your friend just to condemn you? I'm ashamed of you. Why would you ever think of doing something like that? I just lost all respect because you even thought about that. No. That's not what I need. It's not a sin to think about. It's a sin to do it. Number 1, saying you can't do it. Nobody can do that. Sure can. May not be the best. Or should they say, well, you're my friend, anything you want to do is fine with me, and I'll always be your friend, and I think you're going to do what's right? No, that's not necessarily what I need to do. Will it be okay? Let me give you 3 steps. That may not be the best thing, because if they've never been in a similar situation, they may not know the best steps. Or would it be something else? What about somebody who would stand beside me and help me and encourage me to work through the very difficult process of making hard decisions? If I can be a friend like Jesus to someone in temptation, look at Hebrews chapter 2, verses 17 and 18. Speaking of Jesus, therefore in all things he had to be made like his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For in that he himself has suffered, being tempted, he is able to aid those who are tempted. What I really want during a time of difficulty is to talk with somebody who's been there, done that, and got the t-shirt. And when I made that decision, here's what I went through, and they can say, I made a good decision, and here's what happened, or I messed up. I failed the test. I would encourage you not to do the way I did it, but they have suffered enough in order to be able to help me. That's the way Jesus did it. Jesus is our friend. He understands. We did not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, because he was tempted every way we are, and yet he never sinned. He gives us the encouragement to overcome. Come to me, you who labor and are heavy laden. I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. He wants to be our friend. We must give him permission. In Hebrews 5, verses 8 and 9, though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. And having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him. We have to give Jesus permission to be our friend by obeying him. Jesus said, greater love has no one than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. You're my friends if you do whatever I command you. From now on I did not call you servants, but I've called you friends, for all things I've heard of my Father I have made known to you. Jesus wants to be our friend, and he will be our friend if we will give him permission, obey him. If you haven't obeyed Jesus by accepting the gift that he offers, if you believe that he is who he said he was, if you're willing to do what he says, repent and confess him and be baptized and follow him, he'd like to lead. Would you like to do that as we stand and sing?